Hello friends, welcome to today's video in which I thought I would share our NICU experience. So before I get into the video, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And I am going to give this little nugget back to her daddy. I just wanted to have her in the intro since this is very much her story. So okay, I am back, got my green smoothie, and I can get into the story. First, I thought I would share what happened and just the overall experience, and then talk about some of the things that we learned while we were going through it that helped us cope. And I would just like to preface this with everyone copes differently, and this was just our experience and things that helped us. So this is not these aren't things that I think like everything that I say will help everybody, but it was just what helped us. So if it can help even one person, I just thought it would be worth it to share. So let's see. When it all started, it was just 4 days after she was born. We had a home birth and everything went great, apart from the fact that it was just a very long labor from the start of the very first real contraction to when she was born. It was almost 2.5 days. So it was a long labor, but nothing, like there wasn't complications. And when she was born, she was perfectly healthy. So it was definitely not something that we anticipated happening, because once you get past that part, it's kind of, you kind of more or less think that you're out of the woods, which is obviously not always true. So she was born on June 8th. She shares a birthday with her daddy. I also have her birth story video released, so if you haven't seen that yet, I will link it below. You can go check that out. And so 4 days after she was born, we noticed that morning that she was possibly looking a little bit yellow, which is a sign of jaundice. And we had a follow-up appointment with our midwife that day. So when she got there it was both my follow-up appointment and baby's follow-up appointment, we asked her about it, and she said that jaundice is common in babies from, I think, starting around day 3, and it peaks at day 5. I don't think it happens with every baby, but I think it's certainly, more common. It's not always like a cause for concern. It does happen. So she said, but I can do a blood test and send it into the lab, and we can double check the levels just to be safe if you want. And we usually get the results the same day. So I said, yeah, you know what, let's go ahead just to make sure. So we did that, and we also had an appointment with a lactation consultant that afternoon, which we ended up making because it was recommended by the midwife. And we were kind of under the impression that what was causing the jaundice was that she was a little bit dehydrated and not quite getting enough breast milk or formula. We had supplemented a little bit, but we weren't quite sure how much to supplement. And we were told that her stomach is like the size of a marble when she's firstborn, so she doesn't need a whole lot. So yeah, we thought that she was getting enough, but yeah, and she was having some trouble latching, so we were feeding with a nipple shield, and that helped, but still was not great because she would just she would start to latch, but then she would like pull away very soon after. So that was why we did a lot of feedings using a syringe, and me getting the colostrum out using the Haka, and then some formula as well. And so when we talked to the lactation consultant, she was saying that she wanted to, for now, just focus on getting her calories, and that we would work on the latching after, because right now, like at that time, baby girl was not as interested in breastfeeding because she didn't want to work that hard for it. So we just needed to like up her calorie intake so that she would have the energy to work on latching. So she showed us how to use the bottle to feed her, and different techniques to use while feeding her so that it would be an easier transition back to breastfeeding. And then, that way we could kind of go back and forth if we wanted to. So once we had that appointment, like honestly, we thought that things were going to, get a lot better, and that because I think she was going to come back the next day or even the day after, and we thought things were going to be fine. Then we got the phone call from our midwife with the results for the blood draw, and her bilirubin was pretty high. I think it was a 22. And so it was a Friday. Normally they can send you the lights, the light therapy to your house so that you can do it there. But since it was a Friday, there wasn't going to be anyone, I think, to either send them out or come in and like stop by and check on us or something. There was a reason why we couldn't do it, and it was because it was Friday. So we ended up having to go in. They recommended that we come in as soon as possible and have the light therapy at the hospital. So we went to we had to take her to the emergency room at the Children's Hospital here, and that was quite the ordeal. They needed to get an IV in her in order to get her fluid intake up, because the more fluid that she has in her system, the faster she can get rid of the bilirubin. But her veins are so small at this age, being 4 days old, and because she was a little bit dehydrated, that didn't help. So they tried so many times poking her. I wish it was an exaggeration to say that they poked her 20 times, but it was not, because they had about, I think, 4 or 5 different teams try to get the IV in her, and each of those teams tried at least twice. Many of them tried upwards of 4 times. So it was not good. And I got to a point where I was like, oh, enough is enough. It was very hard to watch. Now, a lot of the crying that Ivy did was because she did not like her limbs being held in place, but still, I mean, being poked that many times, obviously, like, yeah, it was just really heartbreaking to watch, and I was getting very upset. So I finally said, enough is enough. There has to be a stopping point. You can't just keep poking her. So I know at that point they consulted with the NICU, because they had been waiting all this time for a bed to open up there as well. So I don't remember exactly what happened, but they were basically saying that the NICU could take over at this point. So we brought her upstairs to the NICU. She had been under the lights for a little bit at this point, but not for very long. While she was in the ER, they put her under the lights, and then they came back to put the IV in her, and so they had to take her off the lights to do that. And so, yeah, she hadn't spent a ton of time under the lights yet. So we go up to the NICU. It has been probably several hours at this point. So I'm, 4 days postpartum, still trying to recover. I had a 2nd-degree tear and a couple of minor 1st-degree tears. So I have like stitches and stuff. And so I'm having to sit in a wheelchair because I was told during recovery it should be 5 days of bed rest, 5 days on the couch, and 5 days near a bed or a couch. So at this point, I haven't even reached the day where I'm done with bed rest. And I had been like in and out of a very uncomfortable wheelchair, to get up and go to the bathroom, and, having to take care of things and change pads and just all that stuff. And so I'm not in very good shape physically, mentally, or emotionally. And the first nurse that we talked to in the NICU said, okay, well, I'm going to try one more time, but I have a 2-poke maximum. So if I can't get the IV within 2 pokes, then I don't do any more. And it's just, it's so frustrating because every single person thought that they could be the ones to do it. The next team would come in, well, I'm sure I can get it. Well, I'm sure I can get it. And it was just so frustrating. But I don't know. I mean, they told us at that point that what they were going to do if they couldn't was put it through her belly button. So at least we knew that that was going to be the next step, and this wasn't going to continue with just poking over and over again. So of course she wasn't able to get it. Now they were also very upset that the people in the emergency room tried as many times as they did, because the IV through the belly button was an option. And so if they knew that all along, why they tried so many times and put her through that when she was already dehydrated, I'm sure putting her through that did not help. So anyways, so they're prepping her for that procedure, and the doctor comes in to talk to us. I am so beyond exhausted at this point. I don't remember a whole lot of things that she said. All I was thinking about was, I just want to get my baby better and take her back home. I know there was something about, like they were saying basically that they needed to keep her overnight and that they would run some tests, and I think it was something like likely that she'd be able to go home the next day. But I was in such bad shape at this point physically. My husband insisted that I not stay overnight. I couldn't argue with his logic because I was in a lot of pain. But it was just so hard to make that decision. 4 days postpartum, all these hormones, not wanting to leave her. A mother should not have to be separated from her child, and especially at 4 days old. So it just went against everything that felt natural to me. But I knew that my husband was right, that if I did not sleep in a normal bed, that I would not get much sleep, and that I would also like a good quality bed, I would not recover fast enough, and I was already behind in my recovery because of that whole night. So we ultimately ended up leaving. Of course, they assured us that she was in good hands and that she was going to be okay and all this stuff. I, of course, was crying. We got to see her. They did the procedure while the doctor was talking to us, and everything went fine, and she was all hooked up and getting fluids, and they were setting the lights up again, and so we were trying to stay hopeful, but it was not easy knowing that we were leaving. And we came home that night, and it was so hard to leave the hospital and come home with empty arms, and then to walk in the front door and the first thing we saw was her empty bouncer. It was just, nothing about it felt right, and it hurt so bad. And then, of course, to rub salt in the wound, I was getting ready for bed, and I took my bra off, and suddenly my breasts felt like they had golf balls in them. They were hard as rock, and it clicked within a few seconds that my milk had just come in. So it was such a slap in the face, because not only was it painful, but my milk had finally come in, and she wasn't even there for me to give it to her. So I kind of broke down at that point, more so than I had already. And then I decided to take a shower to help with pain, because I heard the warm water helps. And so when I had given birth, we had a birth tub, and so we had to turn up the water heater so that we could get the right water temperature to fill the tub. And then afterwards, I kept going to use any faucet in the house, and it would be just scalding within seconds, and I would barely have the hot water on. So I was like, okay, you gotta go turn it back down. And I think we overcorrected, and it was set to a cooler temperature than what we normally had it before we had messed with it. So then when I went to take that shower, I could not get the water to be it was barely warm. And so I broke down again, just saying that all I wanted was to take a hot shower. And so it just felt like the icing on the cake. And then, of course, my husband kind of broke down a little bit because he thought it was his fault since he was the one that changed the settings back and stuff. And of course, you know, he was upset too because of everything that had happened. So it was a very, very emotional night. But we did lean on each other a lot, and that helped. But you also just feel so alone because like even though like I had him and like he was going through this as well, I also like had the hormones on top of it, and I had given birth to her. Like it just, you know, I had this like bond with her that you can't really, it's like this like biological thing. And I don't know, it just felt like like one of my limbs had been torn off of me, and that I was having to live without it for however long it was. Yeah. And so, but I knew that it was going to help to lean on each other. So we just cried and talked and tried to reassure each other. So then the next morning, I think I pumped that night, and then I was pumping again the next morning. I can't remember if I found out before or after, but either way, Steve thought that I should continue resting and that he would go visit her, get an update, and then come back for me. And so while he was there, he called me because he had found out some more news, which was that they found an infection. They didn't know exactly what it was yet, but that it meant that she was going to have to be there longer. They were estimating more like 7 days, which at that point sounded like a lifetime to me. I, of course, broke down again, just howling, tears, absolutely bawling. It was just awful because, of course, I knew that I was going to be able to get back to her, but the thought of not being able to have her at home where we were supposed to be was just heartbreaking. So I ended up staying at home. I think some of this is kind of blurry, but I think I stayed at home again that night just to give myself a better, like, to be in a better place physically. But I told my husband, like, at that point I was saying, you know, once I go back to the hospital, I'm not leaving again. I'm going to sleep there every night. I can't be away from her. So when we did go back together, she was doing a lot better. And I think actually it was while we were home. No, they set up a camera. I can't remember the name, but they have it for every bed, like every room in the NICU. They can set up a camera on your baby so that you can see them even if you're not there. So they did that for us, and so we were able to check in on her whenever we wanted. There was a few times that the camera wasn't like on, and I think they do that if they're feeding her or like doing like vitals, like checking vitals or something. And the first time it happened, like they didn't tell us that, and the first time it happened, we thought something was wrong because we like checked again like 15 minutes later and it was still on that. So it was just So then, you know, we called to ask about it, and that's when we found out that they just do that. Like if they're gonna be on the camera or something, I think is when because it's just for the baby, not for like the nurses to be on camera and stuff. So I think then we also found out that what it was that she had was a staph infection, but it was not the resistant kind, so it could be treated much easier than the resistant kind. And they were still trying to decide how many days of antibiotics that she would need, but it would likely be, you know, somewhere, they were still saying probably around the 7 days, possibly 10. And so when we went back to see her, their plan was to remove the IV from her belly button and put a PICC line in her, which goes in the arm and then connects to a larger vein, I believe, and like kind of like goes up to the heart. I think you can Google it to get more information if you haven't heard of it. It's just PICC, PICC line. But with that, because they couldn't leave the one in her belly button long term, and the PICC line was going to make things easier. She wasn't going to have as many cords and stuff. So, and then once they told us, once they got that put in, that she would be able to be moved to the ICC, which is the infant care center, and it's kind of a step below the NICU, so it's not quite as intense. And really, they said that the only reason that she needed to be there for as long as she was because babies don't absorb antibiotics if given orally, or at least I think certain antibiotics they don't, and so it had to be put in through the IV. And if she's going to be hooked up to the IV, then she has to be in the hospital. So, but they were able to get the PICC line put in, and we were able to get transferred to the ICC, and I think that was on day 3 that she was there. So we did spend one night in the NICU with her. That was not very comfortable. The beds, there's like kind of like a bench type thing, like a booth, like it looks like a booth from a restaurant, only it doesn't have the table. Like that's what it looks like, and it's in the back of the room, and that folds out into a bed. So it's the same material as what like a restaurant booth is, but it's a bed, so you're just laying on that, so it's not very soft. Yeah, not a very comfortable situation. I slept in the chair, like the recliner. It seemed like it was going to be more comfortable than the bed, and then this way we weren't trying to fit 2 people in what felt like a twin size bed. It wasn't quite that small, but almost. And then with the nurses coming in and out to do vitals on her, it just, and the machines going off and stuff, because whenever like there was, the antibiotics were done filling, or if they needed to change the bag, it would beep. It was a very loud beep. So yeah, needless to say, our sleep was not good. And so then we got moved to the ICC, and that room was so much better. It's still not great. It's a hospital room, but it was bigger, and there was a bathroom. And when we were in the NICU, I was having to either walk or be in a wheelchair and have Steve push me down to the bathroom, which was all the way at the other end of the hall. So yeah, that was not good because I was supposed to avoid walking very much. I was still at the point where I was supposed to be resting like on a couch. So yeah, still, I definitely think I still set back my recovery because sometimes it was just easier than being pushed in a wheelchair. So I probably did not take it quite as easy as I should have. One thing that helped was I forgot that I had one of those donut pillows. And so we brought that with us to the hospital. And then when I would use the wheelchair, I would put that donut cushion down. And that felt so much better to sit on. Those wheelchairs were just not good. Anyways, so we switched to the ICC room, and we didn't have a room with a window. Obviously, that would have been nice because, you know, just kind of makes you feel a little bit more normal, and you can like look out the window and just, yeah, like you just don't feel so like confined to a standard hospital room with fluorescent lights and all that. But the fact that it had a bathroom was wonderful. If I had to choose between the two, having a window or having a room with bathroom, I would have chose the room with the bathroom, because then every time I needed to use the bathroom, I didn't have to go down the hall. It was like our own bathroom. It was private. It was, yeah, that was a lifesaver. So then shortly after that, we got the news from the doctor that they were probably going to do 10 days of antibiotics, that they were making their decision, but it was probably going to be 10 days. And I was upset because I had I think it was the day before, one of the other doctors had said that it was probably going to be 7 days. So of course I had in my head that it was going to be 7 days. And she said, well, maybe it's still like, we're still deciding, we're looking at data. So it could possibly still be 7 days, but you know, we'll see. And then later that day, she came back and said that they had made the decision to do 14 days. And that was really hard to hear. And of course she explained it, and I think, I can't remember if I asked right away or if she explained it right away, but either way, it was that there wasn't a whole lot of data out there for babies being on antibiotics, and that the data that was out there being on antibiotics for 7 days, there was some instances of the infection coming back, but when they were on it for 14 days, there was 0 instance of that happening. So they wanted to be safe and do the full 14 days, which I'm not saying that I don't understand. It was just really hard to hear, to go from thinking that it was going to be 7 days to possibly 10, and then to find out it's going to be 14. I mean, and at that point, it sounds like a lifetime away. Now, she had already been on antibiotics for at least a couple of days at this point, but still. And so it wasn't 14 days from that day, but still. And so she was asking if I had any other questions. At that point, I was just so upset. I couldn't ask more questions. I think I maybe asked like 1 or 2, and but I just kind of shut down mentally, and I just didn't want to engage with her because I was just very upset, and just, I was holding Ivy at that time, and so I just kept looking down at her and not really engaging with the doctor. So, and I think she knew that it was hard for me. So all of the doctors that talked to us reassured us that there was nothing that we did that caused this. If, in case you don't know, we have staph on our skin, and as adults we are more immune to it, but babies' systems aren't yet. So really there are so many places that she could have gotten it from, and it would have been really hard to nail down where she got it from. And because we have it on our skin, it could have been something as simple as her scratching her face with her fingernail, you know, that like babies do that on accident all the time. So they reassured us many times that there wasn't anything that we should have done differently, and that it just, babies get infections. It's quite common. We just happened to get one that was a more serious type of bacteria, and so I guess I just kind of saw it as we won the worst lottery possible. So it's still hard, you know, it doesn't matter. I'm glad that they reassured us many times, but you still go through things in your head and wonder, you know, if there's something that you could have done differently, just because I think that's just how our minds work. So, but yeah, so we went home, I think that next night, I can't remember. It was either the next night or the night after. I honestly don't remember if there was a night in between, but I know that we did try again to stay overnight, and that was also not a good experience. We just slept terribly, and we wanted to be awake and alert and enjoying her when we were there, and that wasn't going to happen if we were going to continue to get such bad quality sleep. So it was really hard to make that decision, but we ultimately decided we were going to leave it open. You know, if there was a night that we were doing well and we thought, you know, I think I'll be okay if I get a little less sleep tonight or something. So it wasn't a plan that was set in stone, but we just decided that we were probably going to sleep at home. Like, we would leave as late as possible and then come back as early as possible. Like, we basically just came home for the bed, and that is what we ended up doing. We would usually leave around 10 o'clock at night and then go home and sleep and get up and be back by 10 a.m. the next day. So we basically just used the bed at home to sleep, and then we still spent the majority of the time at the hospital, and we were there to play with her, hold her, feed her. I'd get to give her a bath, so that was nice. I think at this point I'll go through what we learned and like kind of the things that helped us cope, because any other details from the story will come up when I'm talking about those things. So I have some notes here so that I don't forget anything. So the first thing that I put down was acceptance. And I want to preface that with, first, you have to let yourself feel the way you feel. I don't think I would have been able to just simply accept what had happened. I had to first grieve and mourn that these next, however many days, because, we didn't know right away how long she was going to be there, but to accept that however many days they weren't going to look like what I pictured them at home, and to let myself feel sad about that and feel angry about that and whatever else I wanted to feel. And I know that my postpartum hormones played a big part. And so if this were to have happened, months and months down the road, I don't think it would have been maybe quite to the degree, but obviously I still would have felt a lot of the same things. So I think that that's something across the board, that to just let yourself feel how you feel in the moment. And then this just kind of happened naturally, because at first it was like, maybe if it was the irrational part of my brain thinking these things, because obviously I knew that this was not how life works, but it's, you're not always thinking rationally when you're going through stuff like this. So I think after looking back on it, and realizing what I was experiencing, kind of, hindsight of 2020, I was thinking, if I'm just sad enough, or maybe if I'm just angry enough, I can change the reality. But obviously it doesn't work that way. But I think that's why it was so hard for me to stop being angry or stop being sad, because I thought that by stopping those, that it meant that I was somehow okay with what was happening, and I wasn't. And I think also I just thought, maybe if I'm just sad enough or just upset enough, it'll change. Because really, when you think about it, being sad and upset and just continuing to feel that way isn't going to change anything. So I feel like I must have been thinking, if I feel this way and just do it strongly enough, I can change the reality. But I eventually got to a point where I realized that I was missing out on, even though they weren't the same moments that they would have been had they been at home, like my environment wasn't the same, it was still, her first bath, it was still her first smile, it was still, just the first time that she really locked eyes with me, and like just all those types of things, or just, the little things, feeding her and just cuddling her. Sure, they may have been in a hospital, but they were still there. And by focusing so much on how I was feeling, I was missing out on those moments. Now, that's not to say that I was not sometimes just, randomly start crying or feel angry. But those moments at least became a little less often. So it became easier to pull myself back out of feeling that way. So because I just realized that I had to accept reality, because there was no other option. She had to be there. There was nothing that we could do, and no amount of being upset or being sad was going to change that. So it still happens, but it got a little easier with time. Not easy, just easier. So that's that. Another thing and I don't know if every children's hospital has this, or if they have something similar. I would think a lot of them do, but ours had a Ronald McDonald House, and it was on the same floor, like just down the hall. from the NICU and ICC hallways, and it was for any of the families who had loved ones in the NICU or the ICC. And it was this really big area with a full kitchen, a pantry, tables, chairs, couches, TVs, and they would serve food every day. Not every meal every day, like they wouldn't serve food, but they basically had food available for every meal. So if they weren't serving, because they served brunch on the weekends, but so if it wasn't a weekend, they still had like cereal and milk, and sometimes like little breakfast burritos in the fridge that you could heat up and stuff. So there was food and snacks always available. There was food in the pantry that you could make. You could use the kitchen to make, or you could bring your own food and use the kitchen and make your own food. And it was just a huge lifesaver. It made a very difficult situation just a little bit easier to go through. I feel like I'm gonna start tearing up a little bit just remembering it all. It just, so many things weigh so heavy on your heart when you're going through that. So to have some place to go, to just kind of get away a little bit, it's obviously it does not make the situation go away. Like it doesn't take away the pain, but it definitely made a big difference. Having somewhere to go, especially while she was sleeping, which, you know, at that age they sleep a lot. So, and the antibiotics just made her more tired. So yeah, she slept a lot. And so why sit in a tiny room with fluorescent lights and no window and, you know, not really anything to do, if you can take some time away, go to a room where there's a ton of windows and, you know, a television and comfy chairs and couches and a kitchen, and, you know, even if you don't interact with the other people there, just knowing that you're all going through a, you know, somewhat similar situation, it was just, it was a nice thing to be able to have. So we are big into board games. If you have seen some of my other videos, you may have heard me mention that. And so we have some smaller size games like dice games and stuff, and we have something that we can pack them in that's made specifically for that purpose. And so we would bring that with us, and we would just, you know, play some of our smaller games, or we brought our iPads and, you know, would watch you know, shows that we had downloaded on our iPads, and just sort of take a moment to breathe and, you know, fuel our bodies, even if it wasn't always like the most nutritious food. I mean, they definitely had, you know, sometimes they'd have like a side salad with meals, or they'd have, you know, green beans or something. So it wasn't, you know, all, it's not like it was all like a bunch of greasy food all the time, but it was something. And it was, I don't think that there was any food that they served that I didn't like. So, and even if they didn't, you know, they still had the kitchen there. So if you wanted to bring your own food, there was that option too. So yeah, it was nice. And then it was just down the hall. So we would go while she was sleeping, and then we would be back in time for the next feeding. And a few times we missed the feeding, and yes, the first couple of times that it happened, it was hard because, you know, you feel guilty, you want to be there for all those things, like you obviously would be if you were at home. But we couldn't plan that well because it was usually that she would wake up and just be hungry. So, and obviously we couldn't anticipate when that was going to happen. And so she would just end up, you know, sometimes feeding earlier than expected because they had her feeding ad lib. So just when she was hungry, they just also never let her go, I think, more than like 3 to 4 hours without a feeding. So, but yeah, so if you're ever in a similar situation and they have a Ronald McDonald House or something similar, I highly recommend letting yourself have some time and take some moments to yourself. So the next thing is kind of related, but incorporates some sense of normalcy. So for us, that was bringing games with, and we brought them to the Ronald McDonald House, but even if they hadn't had that, we would have found a way to play it in the room, because that was also a way to kind of let your mind not focus so much on all the craziness that is your life and just have a little piece of normalcy. Another thing for us was visitors. So we had people that they had just lifted the visitor restriction that they had in place because of COVID, and well, they had just changed it, and so up to, I think, 3 people could be in the room at a time. So it was 3 or 4, I can't remember, but we had people that wanted to visit, and so when we were feeling up for it, we let them, because that was another way that we got a sense of normalcy, because one, she got to have more people there to, you know, be there to support her and love on her, and we also got some time to chat with those people that came to visit. So it just, you know, for just a brief moment, you can kind of escape from everything that's going on around you. So the next thing is, don't let yourself feel guilty. It's hard at times, but just try not to. And what I mean by that is, like I felt guilty that her life during that time did not look the way I anticipated. We weren't at home. We didn't have, you know, her own, like, she couldn't be in her own crib. We couldn't be in our own beds with her. You know, if there were times that we just wanted to like snuggle her while laying in bed, we didn't have like our own things around us, like couldn't, you know, go by our own schedules and just or have privacy whenever we wanted. We were constantly being interrupted. So and you always have to expect that. They give you privacy when they can, but if there's something that they have to do, that they have to come in for, then that obviously takes precedence. So it's hard not to let that weigh heavy on your heart, but we didn't, you know, it wasn't our fault, and we had to accept that. It was hard, but it just, if you let that eat away at you, that's gonna become your focus. And yeah, obviously there are more important things and bigger mental health matters. And so, yeah. So also kind of related, but try to keep your hopes up and to stay positive, but also know that things don't always go exactly as you planned. So even once we found out that we were going to be there, we didn't know that we were going to be there as long as we ended up being there. And so we were let down multiple times, you know, because first we were thinking, you know, okay, it's just going to be like an overnight thing. And then it changed to, oh, well, she has an infection, so it's probably going to be 7 days. And then I thought it was going to be 10 days. And then finally it ended up being 14 days. So it's just a lot of times to feel let down. But at the same time, I also didn't want to go into it thinking the worst, because I knew that that wasn't healthy either. So I think it would have helped me had I, you know, tried to stay positive, but also just try to accept the fact that they might be wrong in, you know, what they tell you initially. And so to just kind of, as hard as it is, be a little bit more open to things changing, but also, like, you know, trying to keep that positive attitude and not just, because, you know, the alternative is just expecting the worst, and there's no point in living that way either. So the next thing is that not every nurse or doctor there will have the same approach. Some nurses, like for example, some nurses will ask you how you want something handled, and others will just do it the way that they think is right, or that they were taught, or whatever the case may be. So in our case, for example, there was a nurse who, when it was her shift, she asked us if we wanted Ivy to have a pacifier. And we hadn't made that decision yet. We had bought pacifiers, but it's not something that we had decided one way or the other. We just wanted to have them on hand in case we did want to use them. And so we said, what do you think, or something along those lines. And she said, you're the parents, so it's your call. Some of the other nurses will just give her the pacifier, but I believe that because you're the parents, it's your decision, so I'm asking you first. And it was kind of a breath of fresh air, to be honest, to be asked that and to be allowed the chance to give an opinion. I'm not saying that doing it, you know, whatever way you feel is best as a nurse or doctor is necessarily the wrong way, because as long as your baby is being taken care of and they're not being harmed, but it's still, you know, it was still nice to be asked and included, because that was one of the other things that I just felt like, she's my daughter, and I just feel like you just feel like you have no control during the time that they're there. Like, just everything is taken out of your hands. So it was nice to have that, but we also had to keep in mind that not all nurses or doctors did it that way. Another example was her being on probiotics to help with the good bacteria that she was going to lose from being on antibiotics. And some of the doctors were supportive of that and some of the doctors weren't. And so it would just depend on whichever doctor was working at the time, whether or not she got probiotics that day. So yeah, that's just something to keep in mind. And also, kind of on a related note, is that you will also likely not vibe well with every single doctor or nurse that you come into contact with while they're caring for your child. It's not necessarily a bad thing, because you don't have to like someone in order for them to be good at their job. But I will say, like, if you suspect that they're truly doing something wrong to your child, that's an entirely different story. But if you just don't vibe well with them, that is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something to be aware of. Because that was something that I had to accept. There were just a couple of nurses that I just didn't care for. I can't really explain why, but I mean, it's just how it is in life. There are just some people that you just don't get along with as well, and it's just like your personalities don't mesh. And so yeah, but that didn't mean that they were doing something wrong or that they weren't taking care of Ivy. I just, so as the mother or the parent of the child, it is a little bit hard at times to watch someone that you don't really like taking care of your baby. But there wasn't really much I could do. So I just kind of had to accept it, as long as she was actually being cared for and properly. So and the next thing is that your self-care matters too, and you can't be your best self for your child if you're not putting any effort into your own health. And so if, for example, you need to sleep at home every night or every other night, or go home to take naps or whatever the case may be, that's okay. And that doesn't make you a bad parent, because if you're not putting any effort in and you're not caring about your own health, then you can't be your best self to take care of your child. So don't feel guilty if you have to sleep at home at night, or if you have to take a moment and step away. The nurses and doctors are there 24/7, and it's their job to make sure that your child is well cared for. And many of them, it's not just about, making sure that their vitals are stable. They're also, they're a certain kind of doctor or nurse, and so they're also being attentive and loving and caring towards your baby. That was my experience anyway. So, and that I think that does tend to be the case for NICU/ICC nurses and doctors. So it's hard not to feel like it makes you a bad parent, because I can't tell you how many times it broke my heart to leave every single night. And I don't think there was a night where I didn't feel at least something, but every night I still knew that what I was doing was right for both me and her and my husband. And so yeah, I had to accept it and it wasn't always easy, but deep down I knew that it was the right thing. So, and then I think the last thing I have is don't be afraid to ask questions and get clarification. So, like, for example, we wanted to know why she had to be on the antibiotics for the full 14 days, which, like I said, was, there wasn't a whole lot of data, and the data that there was showed 0 instances of the infection coming back if they were on it for 14 days. So that's why, and they just wanted to be extra cautious, so that's why they went with the full 14 days. And then we also wanted to know if we needed to be concerned about her losing good bacteria as well while being on the antibiotics, and if there was anything that could be done about it, which of course, the answer was that probiotics was an option, that there also was there wasn't a ton of data about that, and that some of the doctors believed in it and some of them didn't, but that, that was, and also that her getting my breast milk was going to help, and that, because she's so young, like, that she has time and will inevitably build her good bacteria, her microbiome back up again. There's also still not a lot of data on the long-term effects of babies being on antibiotics. So that was the best answer that they could give us, was what they did know. And she was on probiotics some of the days that she was there, and then we started giving her some when we got home as well. Like, we kept that up. And of course, we were breastfeeding. That was another thing that we asked about, was that if I pumped, could I bring my milk in and we could feed her that way, so that, and like bring, like, my, like, any supplies that we had built up, and so that she could be fed breast milk while we were at home. And obviously the answer was yes, so that was good. But yeah, we just got used to asking all the questions that we could think of, especially after, the initial shock and anger and sadness and whatever wore off. And then eventually it got to a point where there really wasn't any updates on her every day. The doctors would do their rounds. They would come in and just, say that she looks great, and, it's just a waiting game at this point. So, that was both good and bad. It was like, it was good to hear that there wasn't anything wrong and that she was looking healthy. In fact, some of the doctors even said that she was like the healthiest baby in the NICU. But at the same time, it just also kind of fueled a little bit of the frustration, because she was having to spend nights in the hospital for something that, had she been just a little bit older, she could have taken antibiotics for at home. Although I don't know if that's, like, if it were just like a less bad infection, not a staph infection, if it had been like an ear infection or something like that. So yeah, it's good when you hear that, like, everything's going well, but it also sucks to know that's like the only thing that they're having to spend multiple nights in a hospital and hooked up to machines, and having to hold them with wires hanging off of them, and just, obviously it could have been worse, but it also could have been so much better. So yeah, it was not an easy experience by any means. There was no part of any of that was easy. And I feel the same way about it looking back on it now. But we are grateful that she was able to recover completely and that we caught it. That's another thing I forgot to mention. The doctors believe that the jaundice that she had was actually being caused by the staph infection. So not malnourishment or, dehydration and stuff that was kind of originally suspected. So the jaundice kind of turned out to be a little bit of a blessing in disguise, because that was the symptom that was noticeable. Had she not developed the jaundice, it would have taken a little bit longer for the other symptoms to come, like her having a fever, and I don't know what all the other signs would have been, but I know that her having the jaundice helped us catch this earlier inadvertently and saved her from it becoming worse because we caught it so early. So that was good, and we were very thankful for that. So it was not easy to go through, but of all the things that could have gone wrong and the way that it all unfolded, it worked out in the end. And I guess we're also grateful that we had such good insurance. I don't know if I want to share how big that bill was, but yeah, we were extremely grateful for our good insurance, because that could have just been yet another thing hanging over our heads for however many months or even possibly years that it could have taken us to pay off that kind of a bill. But they do have like payment plans and stuff, and they're, because we chatted with one of the financial people that they have on staff there, so there would have been options, but yeah, it just would have been another layer of stress. So I think that is everything, and if I forget anything, I'll insert it on the screen and put it in the description box below as well. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, or if you have any experiences of your own that you think people could benefit from knowing about, leave those in the comments too. And again, give this video a thumbs up if you liked it and found it helpful. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.